Well, welcome to part 5 of series 1, and it's actually the last lecture in this series, so if you've hung in there with us through all of these, I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We're going to talk now about the marketing research industry. And the reason that we're going to talk about this is not because I want to brag about my own industry where I work, it's because I want you to have a context of what it is that marketing researchers do and why there's so much diversity in the marketing research marketplace. So I'm going to give you a bunch of terms, and these are terms that you need to understand them broadly. You don't need to necessarily be able to understand all of them in a great deal of specificity because they're not going to show up on any test in a really tricky way. But you need to be able to have an understanding of what they mean. So there are many types of marketing research services that are available within the marketing research industry. We also just call it the MR industry sometimes, just because marketing research is a really long term. So in the MR industry, the first distinction that we have are what we call internal and external suppliers. So internal suppliers are marketing researchers who work for an organization that is conducting the research. So for example, many of the large financial companies here in the area, Scottrade, Nebber Jones, and groups like that, have internal marketing research departments that do the research for them or that manage the research process. So they're what you call an internal supplier. They're on salary and on staff to do research for their own organization. They don't go out and do it for anybody else, though, just for their own organization. External suppliers are the folks that actually set up shop just to be researchers. They don't necessarily work for anybody else. They might be part of an organization that sells services, but for the most part, external researchers are researchers that are outside of your organization that you contract with to do research for you. So it's kind of like hiring an attorney or an accountant. You hire a researcher. But researchers come in different shapes and sizes too. There are really large research firms, and in fact one of the largest in the world is here in St. Louis. It's called Merit's Research, and research is not all that their organization does. It's a component of their services that they offer, but they are one of the largest marketing research organizations in the world. They're right over in Fenton on the way to Six Flags. You can see them, they're right next to the old Chrysler plant. They're a large external supplier. My firm, where we have just a few people working in my office, is a small external marketing research firm. I don't work for any company just to do their research. I have a lot of client organizations that I work for. I'm external. You also have full service and limited service researchers, and full service means that they pretty much do it all. And believe it or not, a lot of the large research firms are not full service. A lot of them are actually limited service. Limited service means that they specialize in certain kinds of research that they're really good at, that they can do with some level of efficiency, but that they turn away work that doesn't fit their specialty or doesn't fit what it is that they do. So like I said, believe it or not, there's a lot of large firms that are not full service. They don't offer every kind of research. A lot of them only offer quantitative research, and we'll talk about qual and quant as this class goes on, but qualitative research is one of the things we're going to talk about in a moment too. But qualitative research is something that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of manpower, whereas quantitative research can be conducted with telephone banks, or it can be conducted with auto dialers. It can even be conducted with online research very cheaply and easily, and at a much larger scale than qualitative research can. So sometimes limited service suppliers really just like to focus on the types of analysis or the types of methods that they're good at using, and they just kind of let the other firms that they're competing with pick up the other work. Now my firm, as it happens, we're a small firm, like I said, and we're a full-service research firm. We will do just about any kind of study that comes in our door. Now, there are certain things that we'll turn away. If we think that a study is going to be too much trouble for too little reward, we'll turn that away. And we also will turn away things that require too much of a specialization, just because, since we work with many different clients at a given time, we often aren't able to just focus on one project at a time. And so if there's something that requires a lot of really in-depth specialization that requires a lot of work that we're not used to doing, that might be an opportunity where we would refer that out. But generally, a full-service firm will try to do any kind of research that is brought to it, or at least to help set the client up with someone that can do that work, whereas a limited service firm will only do certain kinds of research. Our next distinction is primary versus secondary versus syndicated. Now, secondary and syndicated kind of go together, and we're actually going to read later on in the textbook about the distinction between those two. But where those are different from primary research, so primary research is research that you conduct yourself or that you hire someone to conduct for you. And it's usually because you have something that's very specific that needs to be solved. Secondary research and syndicated research are where you are buying research that's already been completed and applying it to your problem, but it's not research that was conducted specifically for you. It's research that was conducted either for your industry or for a competitor or for a analogous organization or for an academic institution, something along those lines. So secondary and syndicated data are research that have already been completed or that are ongoing and continuing to be completed, whether or not the client needs it. Whereas primary research is focused on the client needing it, and it's only completed if the client requests it and contracts out for it. So there's a big distinction between those two. Most of the research that you're going to learn about in this class is going to be primary research, but we are going to learn about secondary research. In fact, we're going to do a secondary research process on our class project as a first step. So it's not to say you don't use secondary research, it's just to say that when we're talking about marketing research, most of the time we're thinking about primary research. Finally, we have qualitative versus quantitative versus hybrid. And I've already kind of mentioned qual and quant, but let me go over them again. Qualitative research has an L, and that L stands for listening, okay? When you are conducting qualitative research, you are generally listening to what other people have to say in a focus group or in a structured, detailed depth interview, in an ethnographic interview where you're going and observing them in their environment and asking them all kinds of questions about what they do. There is another form of qualitative research that's called observational research, and while it's not necessarily about listening, because you're not necessarily asking people questions in an observational study, it's still about paying attention to unstructured detail, what they're doing, how they're behaving, how they're interacting, all those sorts of things. It's observational, so it's a lot like listening. That's qualitative research. So qualitative research is about depth and context and detail. Quantitative research, on the other hand, has the letter N in it, and that N means numbers. And when you're looking at quantitative research, what you're really going to be looking at most of the time is statistics that are meant to describe either the sample or the population. And we'll talk about those terms later on in the semester if you're unclear on what they mean. But quantitative research is about numbers. It's often about very large samples that are intended to describe what a population feels about something. Now, that's not always why quantitative research is used, but that's primarily what it's used for in marketing research. There's also a hybrid approach. Now, sometimes we call this mixed method, mixed mode, or quali-quant. They all are the same idea, where we're going to mix qualitative and quantitative into the same study. How this is done varies from researcher to researcher. As a hybrid approach, it's customized. Sometimes it means doing a qualitative pilot phase and then a quantitative full phase. Sometimes it means having a quantitative survey with some qualitative questions in it. Sometimes it means having a qualitative process with quantitative measurements included. There are all kinds of ways that these two things can be merged together. Generally speaking, though, most studies lean more towards qual or quant, and they're kind of categorized as such. Very few are just called hybrid unless that's what the firm specializes in doing. Now, my firm does do a lot of hybrid studies because we do a lot of small sample studies with really well-defined tiny populations, and so they're necessary. But a lot of firms really lean more towards qual or quant, and a lot of researchers really identify being more qual or quant. And this also tells you a little bit about their background a lot of times, because qualitative researchers tend to come from the fields of sociology, anthropology, or psychology. Quantitative researchers might come from sociology, but they also can come from fields like computer science or engineering or the hard sciences or the medical sciences, where they're more used to dealing with large numbers. And in fact, quantitative research can get very, very sophisticated because of all of these folks and the statisticians and the engineers and the economists that all come into play. So quantitative research often appears to be much more scientific than qualitative research. Now we'll talk about that too as the semester goes on. As a researcher, I'm concerned about making sure that the research that I'm doing is valid and reliable and that it has a scientific approach. But I question a lot of times if marketing research is really scientific, and we'll talk about that another time. Now, fun fact, if you want to be able to put all these terms into practice, understand how they relate to the real world, my firm is an external supplier. We're full service, and we provide primary research using both qualitative and quantitative techniques. So whenever I talk about my experience, just keep that in mind. All right, so that concludes our lecture series for the first week. And I just want to say, in closing, a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to seem really unfamiliar at first, and it's going to seem a little overwhelming. Marketing research is a big topic, and if you haven't figured it out by now, because it's what I do for a living, I really love it. I really care about it. I'm very passionate about it. And I want you to be too. Hang in there is what I'm going to ask you to do. The first few weeks, we're going to learn a lot of terminology. We're going to learn a lot of theory. We're going to learn a lot of big ideas. Later on in the semester, though, we're going to be putting this stuff into practice. And we're going to be really beginning to see the results of what this can do. And I think by the end of the semester, you're going to feel very, very good about marketing research. You're going to feel like it is a tool that you really want to use and that you're glad you learned about. And even if it just means that later on in your career that you build a little SurveyMonkey survey and send it out to your customers, you're going to be better equipped to do that than you would be if you didn't go through this class. You're also going to be much better equipped to deal with data that's coming your way, and you're going to have a lot of data coming your way in your career. You're going to be more skeptical of bad research, and you're going to be more supportive of decisions that are being made with good research. So all of this is going to work out to your benefit, I promise. If you're getting overwhelmed, if you're feeling confused, the first thing I would encourage you to do is reread your textbook. The textbook, it's not the be-all, end-all of textbooks. I'll be honest with you. There are some things in the textbook that I disagree with, but generally speaking, I think it's a really good textbook. It's in its 7th edition. It's been around for a long time. It's pretty well respected. And I think they've done a good job of explaining these concepts. Then I would look over the lecture notes that I posted up. The lecture notes are very carefully written, and they should walk you through this stuff in a good level of detail that if you miss something here in the lecture, that you can really pick up on in reading the notes. Then review these lectures again. Take some more notes. Try to make sure that you really understand these topics. A lot of these words you really need to know. As the semester goes on, you might even want to return back to this series and watch it again, because it'll start to become more clear and you'll begin to understand it more. But if you do that, I promise you, you're going to have a much easier time in this class, because you're going to feel like all of these things that you're learning, all of these foundational details, are actually relevant and important to the big picture that's shaping all of the little nitty-gritty stuff you're going to be doing here in a few weeks.